Welcome, everybody, to Jon and Brandon's Untitled Rock Show. I'm Jon, he's Brandon, and on this episode, we will be talking about our favorite scene albums of all time. But before we do, Brandon, how's it going, buddy?
It's going well, man. How are you?
I am doing excellent. I'm very excited to record this podcast because we've been talking about doing this for a while. How long has your list for this been locked in?
I want to say a few months at least. Every once in a while, I'll throw one of these albums on and be like, "Man, is this number one?"
Yeah,
But you know,
yeah. I think before making this list, I had never really thought about what my top 10 all time were. I've always kind of had like my Mount Rushmore, but this was my first time really figuring out what my personal top 10 was. Putting it together made me realize a lot of things about this time in music, mostly how spoiled we fucking were.
right?
It's ridiculous, dude. But also, how many of the most influential of the albums of my life came out in a 3-year period? We can elaborate on that as we go through our picks, but it was a ridiculous time in music, man.
It really was, man. These very short few years were something special. So
They were. Should we tell people what loose guidelines we had in place for making these lists before we get into it?
absolutely, man. Let it out.
So the rules are simple: one album per band, for variety's sake, more than anything, and no blink, meaning no precursor to the scene pop punk bands, regardless of timeline overlap. We will dive into that era of pop punk down the road. With that out of the way, you ready to get into it, buddy?
Let's do it.
All right, man, let's go. We aren't doing this in a ranked order. I had 10 picks. Brandon had 10 picks. Some of our picks were for the same albums. We'll just run down the list in the best way that makes sense as we go along. Let's get some of the more obvious picks out of the way first, shall we?
Let's do it.
Let's talk about Fall Out Boy. You and I both picked their debut album, Take This to Your Grave, as our favorite album of theirs. This might not be a surprise to you or anybody listening to this podcast, but it is a popular belief that their second album, From Under the Cork Tree, is their best. It's got a solid argument based on its commercial success and longevity alone. You can still turn on the radio today and hear Sugar We're Going Down or Dance Dance. That is not the case for any of the songs on Take This to Your Grave.
Right.
So, what is it about this album that makes you and I like it the most? I'll let you go first on this.
That's a great question. I think the main thing is that it was in the kind of formative years of the scene. This was released in 2003, and I will never forget. I looked forever, man. I had a really shitty internet connection at this time, and I had seen a music video on MTV, man, and I was just trying to figure it out, man. And the music video was of this hardcore kid hanging upside down, screaming into the microphone. And when I finally found it, I was just kind of blown away a little bit. That music video was Saturday by Fall
Mhm.
Out Boy. And if you listen to Saturday, you won't get much of that kind of energy or that kind of bravado from Fall Out Boy again. From Under the Cork
No.
Tree is obviously a very good album, but this one shaped what that album was. It From Under the Cork Tree has so much crossover appeal, especially like with Dance Dance, but this album, man, every single track is a banger, man. I listen to this vinyl record often,
Mhm.
Grand Theft Autumn, Dead on Arrival, Saturday. That
Yeah.
3 song run is just wow, you
It's
know?
unreal, man. Yeah, that 3 song run is phenomenal. I love that you brought up Saturday because I think one of the coolest things about Fall Out Boy is all the times I saw them throughout the years. Even to this day, the last time I looked up a set list of theirs, they still close every show with Saturday, no
Right.
matter what. The reason I picked this album is simple, man. This was the album that was out when I discovered them, and these are the songs on it that I connected to the most. To be a little more specific, though, they were the first band shirt that I ever bought from a Hot Topic back in the day. Shout out the Yuba City Hot Topic and the teal green Fallout Boy shirt with the sun on it that said "Drop it like it's hot." I would still wear that shirt if I had it today. Quick detour. What's the oldest band shirt you still have?
It's from 2005, from the time I saw Suicide Silence, and it is the Green Monster. I don't wear it; it doesn't fit me. It's
Oh my
tucked
God.
away somewhere,
Send
but
me a
it's.
picture of that. I have to post
I
it on
have.
our
I'll have
Instagram.
to pull it out of the garage, man.
Please do. I wish I had anything from this era too. I lost most of it, or it was way, way too small.
I think I still have that shirt. It's been a long time since
If
I've been
you
able to
have
wear it.
something from 2005, man, that is worth applauding. That's insane. To summarize and get things back on track, though, they were one of my first concerts. They were one of the first ringtones I ever downloaded. The bridge on Chicago was so 2 years ago was my voicemail greeting for a few years. Confused many of my relatives. I
Oh
have like
man.
so many memories tied to this album that it wins on sentimentality alone, but it also wins in terms of the music. For me personally, at least, I won't know anyone that picks From Under the Cork Tree, like, because I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. I wouldn't knock anybody for picking that. It is the normie pick, but I get it. Like, it is this is the superior album, I think, if you grew up with them and were around for this era. I know it's probably bad podcasting to just read song titles again, but seriously, man, Tell Mick, Dead on Arrival, Grand Theft Autumn, Saturday, Chicago is so 2 years ago. Like, I rest my case, man. Anything you have
Right.
left to say on this album?
No, man. I think that's it. Fall Out Boy happened to play at the first show that my now wife and I ever went to in 2009, and you're right. They closed that set with Saturday, so it all of this music is pretty special to me as well.
Yeah, I love how no matter how much new music they put out, they're always going to still close with Saturday.
Right.
Okay, man. We can move on to My Chemical Romance. Again, we both picked their sophomore album, Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, as our favorite. It's not necessarily a hot take to think that this is their best album. But it felt like this album was overshadowed by Black Parade until more recently. I'm sure there's a small contingent of people out there that would pick their debut album, Bullets, as their favorite, but I've just never connected with that album personally as much as Three Cheers or Black Parade. It's great, but I would rank it third out of the first three. What are your personal MCR rankings, and what is it about Three Cheers that made it your favorite of theirs?
Three Cheers is just it's this album, man. That I mean, again, dude, you have just the initial 3 song run of Helena, Give 'Em Hell Kid to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Just insane. Yeah,
That
I
speaks for
like I
itself.
like Bullets. I actually do think it's a hot take for Three Cheers to be, at the very least, outside of people who grew up in it. And I think that's something that you said about Fall Out Boy, and I really think it depends on who you heard first, like which album. I'm sorry, you heard first. If your first
Mhm.
exposure to My Chemical Romance was The Black Parade, then I think The Black Parade is going to be your favorite album from them. If your first exposure to My Chemical Romance was coming home at 3:30 in the afternoon, throwing on Steven's Untitled Rock Show, and hearing "I'm Not Okay," trust me, or "I'm Not Okay," I promise, for the first time ever,
Yeah.
then you absolutely are going to pick Three Cheers. You know?
Oh, 100%, man. I think they're one of the few bands on this list that I actually saw live before ever hearing a recording of. I saw them at Twisted Christmas in Sacramento when they opened for Papa Roach, the Used, the Donnas, and Taking Back Sunday. I was one of the few in that arena who had not heard them. To this day, I've never seen an opening act have that many people singing along to every word. And seeing MCR and the Used in their Under Pressure era as my introduction to the band made me a fan for life, and that will never
My
change.
God, John, what a set.
It was nuts, man.
I will say I did see Hawthorne Heights open for Silverstein once, and there were equal amounts of people singing. So, but
Really, it was just like a two band show.
no, it was on one of their anniversary tours. So
Gotcha.
yeah,
I
Hawthorne
I
Heights had a
gotcha.
big banner behind him. Behind them that said, I used to listen to Hawthorne Heights in high school. You know,
Of course. That's fucking awesome. Yeah, man. I don't have an argument against any of the other MCR albums being their best, but I don't need one. Three Cheers is flawless and a perfect representation of the time that it came out, both sonically and aesthetically. I can't hear I'm Not Okay and not picture Gerard's eyes in the music video covered in all of that red makeup.
So much red makeup.
Dude, for that mental image to still be so clear 20 years later shows the staying power that this album still has.
Yeah, man, it's hard to. I mean, you could close your eyes and throw a dart at this album and land on a banger. There's
Yeah,
just,
you really
it's,
could.
it's just every track, and I'm glad that I listened to it like every day this week because holy fuck, man.
Yes, dude.
Like,
It was so much fun to revisit all of these albums.
yep.
Anything else you want to say on MCR in general?
Actually, in general, My Chemical Romance put out a song last year, and we talked about it a little bit on the
Hmm.
podcast when it released. But I actually went back and listened to Bullets again after that song came out, and then after I listened to Three Cheers, I was like, you know what, I'm going to go back and listen to Bullets, and uh, yeah, the new song doesn't sound anything like Bullets. So everybody that's saying that is wrong. But I don't know when the last time you listened to Bullets was, but you should most definitely go do that. It's a solid album. I don't think that it
I
has as
circle
many
back to it
bangers,
occasionally.
but I don't think it has as many bangers. But I Brought You My Bullets, You Brought Me Your Love is a good album.
I will agree with you there, man. Do you have a take on their last album, Danger Days from 2010?
Forgettable. Is that the word?
I'm surprised you even had a take for it, honestly.
I mean, it is what it is, man. All right.
Yeah. All right, man. Next up, we have Taking Back Sunday. And again, we both selected their debut album, Tell All of Your Friends, or I just tell all your friends. Why do I keep adding an of? What the fuck? Come on, man. Uh, of all the bands that I went back to revisit for this podcast, I think Taking Back Sunday has the best three album run of all of them from a consistency standpoint. Yet picking their best album was the easiest. Why was that?
I think I think it really depends on which one you heard first. If your first introduction to Taking Back Sunday was watching on MTV Flava Flav dance around in the You're So Last Summer video, then this is most definitely your favorite album by them.
You don't think it's just because it's the most iconic? Like, I think when I revisit all three, they're all so good, but
They are
like
all very good.
this one's just different. I'll give you a few reasons I picked this one over where you want to be in louder now.
Let's go.
First, cute without the E. If we were doing a podcast picking the top three scene songs of all time, that would be one of the picks.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not just one of the most iconic songs of their discography, but of the entire genre.
Yes.
Second, this album was instantly iconic. Within months of it coming out, kids all over my high school were wearing the same Taking Back Sunday Long Island, New York shirt. And third, it was even social influencing social media back then. For a 2 year period, you could not go on somebody's MySpace page and not find a quote from one of the songs on this album in their headline or elsewhere. It was almost always the truth is you could slit my throat and with my one last gasping breath, I'd apologize for bleeding on your shirt. Because of course it was.
That was my
And
aim away message for
of
forever.
course it was.
You
It was
know?
all of ours. It was everybody's, man. That line should also remind everybody how absolutely ridiculous and overdramatic this whole genre and time in music was. But that's what made it so great, man.
You know, I was reading actually some lyrics today, and they just is it me or is there not lyrics like this anymore? Like it feels like all of the drama's been taken away from us.
Yeah, it's not fun anymore. There's still some good music. It's just not as fun. But there's a few
See,
exceptions,
this
but
was
you know what
really
I mean.
sad music, but it was really fun. Now all the sad music is sad.
Yeah, it bums me out.
You know, I'll say this. I got this year they released a remastered version of this album on vinyl record, and I ended
Hmm.
up picking it up, and it came with a 7-inch of their demos for this album. And let me tell you, these demos are great. We can probably
I
find
want
them
to
on
hear
YouTube.
them.
We can
Yeah,
probably find them on
oh
YouTube,
wait,
but
I have it. I bought the vinyl as well. I almost forget that I bought that vinyl because you told me about it. But yes, I have that as well, and I've heard the demos. I
they're
think they might
good.
even be on Spotify.
Oh, really? Yeah, maybe they are.
Maybe, maybe. What's your favorite song on the album that's not cute without the E?
uh, Ghost Man on third.
Ooh, great pick. I think I'm gonna go Timberwolves at New Jersey.
All right, there you go.
All right, man. Let's talk about the used
Okay.
to round out the Mount Rushmore of emo. Um, we both have the used on our list, but for the first time, you and I picked a different album. I picked their self-titled debut. You picked their sophomore masterpiece in Love and Death. This is the one that I was most torn on, so I'm not surprised at your pick and don't have a good argument as to why their self-titled is just slightly more my thing. I think what it comes down to is that for the most part, I tend to prefer the more raw and unpolished sound of an up and coming band more than I do when they're at their peak and on top of the world. And you tend to feel the same way. So, what is it about In Love and Death that makes it different from the rest?
I, in 2016, took my now wife to a show in Santa Ana and had the best concert experience of my entire life. That show was a anniversary show of In Love and Death. I've been to hundreds of concerts, seen hundreds of artists. This show was hands down the best. And it really kind of solidified what is very easy for me to say, that In Love and Death is one of the best albums I think ever made. Like it has everything, man.
Hard agree.
It has emotion, it has anger, it has sadness, it has just raw aggression. I mean, you talk about the rawness of being in a new band. Take it away, listening, sound effects and over dramatics, bro. There is some real rawness on In Love and Death, and don't get me wrong, there's plenty on their self-titled as well. And
Yeah.
there's no way for me to argue which one is really better, because again, they're both
No,
fantastic.
there's no
But
wrong answers.
In Love and Death is, for me, a much more sentimental album. We have that tour poster framed and hanging up on our wall in our house. I
As you
listen. I
should.
listen to this album constantly. I've even got some people at work. I created a Sad Boy Thursday playlist for them, since they seem to think that Thursdays are Sad Boy Thursdays. So I listen. I get to listen to Take It Away and listening every Thursday now. So
I'm jealous of you. That's incredible. I agree though, man, with everything that you said. In Love and Death is a 10. All that I've got is a perfect song. Everything about that album is incredible, but their self-titled just hits me different. Maybe
that's
memories,
fair.
the taste of being buried myself alive, box full of sharp objects, blue and
Say Days
yellow,
Ago.
on my own. Yeah, say days ago, bulimic. The album cuts are just as good as the memorable
Oh
songs. Blue and
yeah.
yellow used to be on the radio. That's the world I want to live in again, you know? I love this album, man. I love both of these albums. I wish that I could go back to this time and just appreciate seeing them live back then. Like all of my memories of it are great, but they're so faded, which either means I was doing it right and just enjoying the moment, or I just wasn't soaking it in enough. But I love it. I loved your pick. I love my pick. Anything else on this one?
No, I think these are both very near perfect albums.
Is
And
the Hanging Heart the single most iconic logo from any band of this era?
I straight up have so much merchandise with this heart in a noose.
Yep.
We have the fucking tree ornament. I have a sweatshirt with it. I've got a number of shirts with it. It is definitely the most iconic. I mean, it's the most iconic logo in this scene, I think. And yeah, I don't even think that's exaggerating. I think that the heart on a noose is, as soon as I see it, I get transported back to fucking 2005. You know,
Hmm.
like
Friend of the podcast, Anthony, had a floor to ceiling hanging heart drawn onto his bedroom wall.
Oh man,
It was
that's a
on
pro
another
move.
level.
That's a pro
Yeah, it
move,
was
man.
great. It was great. I got to see if he has a picture of that he can send me.
That is a pro
Um,
move.
all right, let's talk about Under Oath and their album, They're Only Chasing Safety. This is technically their second album, but first with Spencer Chamberlain. This is another one that we both had on our list, I think.
Yep.
I wasn't surprised to see that, but you tend to gravitate again towards the heavier side of things. So, what was it that made you pick this over Define the Great Line?
Uh, I honestly, this album just brings me back to discovering all of this, discovering
Mm-hmm.
and listening, and just being around people who cared. And it's again, this is, I mean, throw a dart at our playlist this week, and you'll find a 10 very easily, man.
Yep.
Watching the reinventing your exit on Fuse,
Mm-hmm.
listening to A Boy Brushed Red, that first can you hear your heartbeat racing, just gets me going, man.
Yes. I could not agree more. I'll tell you why I picked this one over Great Line with a little fun fact. This was the first album that I ever downloaded on my first iPod. And I could not have picked a better album. I had only heard Reinventing My Exit, Your Exit, whatever it is, by the point that I bought it. And by the end of that day, I'd heard that whole album at least over 5 times,
Oh
mostly
yeah.
because it was the only album I had money for after buying the iPod, but also because it is a fucking awesome album. Um,
I have my burned copy of this in my CD case. We recently found my wife's actual copy of this like a couple of years ago, and
I love that.
um, it's great, man. It's a solid album, man.
It's an all-timer, man.
That first Spencer cat screech scream on Young and Aspiring is
Hmm.
epic, just epic.
They opened with that, I think the second time that I saw them at Warp Tour, and it was like in that specific scream was just like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever experienced. I think that they definitely went on to make some more technical albums, but there's something about just the unchained energy and creativity on display throughout this album that separates it from the rest and puts it in the same tier as bands like Fall Out Boy and My Chem, Taking Back Sunday, and The Used.
I think that Define the Great Line might be like an album that I might like better, just on like a musical standpoint, right? But this
Hmm.
album is just so fucking nostalgic, man. There's no words on this album cover, but you show this to anybody who was at all a member of this scene, and this could be like a litmus test. Like, what is this? And you show them this
Yeah.
photo, and okay, we're great friends. You know,
Yeah, very true. That's pretty much how we met.
right?
Um, we are doing this as a ranked list, but without question, this is a top five scene album of all time. Would you object to that hypothetical placement?
I don't know how I could.
Yeah,
How do I object to that?
you cannot. You cannot. From here on out, our lists differ quite a bit, so we'll kind of go one for me, one for you. Starting with Panic at the Disco's album, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out. This was one I picked. Every album on our list is unique, but this album is truly a one of one. There has never been an album
Most
that sounded
definitely.
like it before. There never will be again. This is a love it or hate it album for most people. Where did it fall for you back then, and where do you fall on it now?
So back when this album came out in 2005, I want to say, let me see here. The next year in 2006, I ended up receiving a book as a gift, and reading this book and loving this book. And this book was Invisible Monsters by Chuck Palahniuk.
One of my
And
wife's favorites.
it's a great fucking book. Time to Dance is on this album, is about, or written as kind of a synopsis almost, of Invisible Monsters. And hearing this song after I had read that book was kind of fucking wild, because you hear this song, and I'm thinking like, how do I know this? And it's like, oh shit, that's it. It's the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this album's really great, man. I don't think it made my top 10, but I'm glad you threw it on here so we could talk about it. There are obviously some of the most iconic emo song titles, and like "Lying is the
Of
most fun
course.
a girl can have without taking her clothes off." Like
I write
just
sins. Yes.
right, and it's
Yeah,
just
I think a lot of people can appreciate this as a novelty album, but I personally think that this album is great on its own terms, not just as a novelty. Like, sure, I Write Sins has become part of the modern pop culture lexicon, but to make a piece of art this polarizing at such a young age that has stood the test of time to those who loved it to begin with is absolutely remarkable, all things considered.
Yep. Yeah, most definitely, man. It is. I think it stands on its own for a number of reasons. I don't think Panic or Brandon ever put out another album like this, and I think that was on purpose. How do you top something like this? This will for always be Panic at the Disco's legacy, whether people like that or not.
Mhm.
But I think that if Panic at the Disco died after this album and Brendan Urie went on to do another thing that was exactly the same music as Panic put out after this album, but like left this as Panic at the Disco, I think I think this would have been just cemented in the iconography of the scene for sure.
I agree. I feel like Panic pretty much just became Brendan Urie's solo project, if you really think about it. Those
Yeah.
first two albums, Pretty Odd and A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, are mostly the same groups. I don't know if there was any lineup changes between those, but I feel like most Panic people feel like there's the band that made A Fever You Can't Sweat Out and the band that is everything after that.
Right.
It's just they've never even like tried to reapproach this thing, and I don't know if they ever could, even if they wanted to. It's a very weird artifact of the scene, honestly.
Yep.
All right, man, let's move on to Silverstein. You picked their album Discovering the Waterfront. Was there any hesitation in that? Did you consider When Broken, or are you more of like an Arrivals and Departures guy, or did you know that this was it?
This is it. There's no hesitation. This is the album, front to back, 10 out of 10, fucking amazing. I mean, even they even end the album with a cover. Like
Yes. Yeah.
it is from the starting riff of Your Sword, My Dagger to the very last line of Call It Karma. This album is a fucking banger. I discovered Silverstein when I was hanging out in high school and saw somebody's notebook, and they had drawn the "When Broken is Easily Fixed" robot with the heart coming out,
Hmm.
pulling his heart out. And I remember being like, "What's that?" And she was like, "This is Silverstein. This is who I'm listening to right now. Do you want this CD?" And like handed me a burned CD, and I immediately put that into my Discman, and for the rest of the day, listened to this entire album front to back. I want to say like 6 times, 7 times, and I was like reluctant to give it back to her at the end of the day. I was like, all right, I think I'm gonna keep this. I think this is the peak. Like, I
Oh
think
my God.
this is it, you know. And ever since, Silverstein has been one of my favorite bands of all time. We've talked about as many of their albums as we have since we started this podcast, and I have almost completed their physical media collection for my own collection. This album is absolutely iconic. There was no question in my mind that it was Discovering the Waterfront. It's this one. What
Yeah,
about you? What do you think about this album, John?
it's a masterpiece. I've just always felt like a casual Silverstein fan, and I had Discovering the Waterfront in my honorable mention. So I'm glad you picked it as well. I just feel validated now from a Silverstein stan like yourself, picking it as well as your favorite.
Look, man, there's a
Uh,
reason that they remastered and re-recorded a lot of the songs from When Broken is Easily Fixed. Shane's voice is not awesome on that album, but the rawness and the unfiltered fucking awesomeness that is his shitty vocals on that album is the same way I feel about Atreyu's, I think it's Lip Gloss and Black, or at least
mhm.
Suicide Notes and Butterfly Kisses. I think that's the album. I
Pretty
think
much
that's,
all
yeah.
Atreyu. Yeah.
Well, their first album was a little different than The Curse, but it's the same thing where you've got these young kids and they don't know how to do vocal filters and they don't know how to process their
Yeah.
music in post, and so they just write a CD and they scream their little hearts out, and you can tell that it was more refined by this time because Shane's voice sounds fucking amazing on this album. Even just the original recordings are just fucking perfect. So, yeah, man.
We
I,
should do a best shitty vocals of all time scene pod one day.
Honestly, those are some of the best
They're
music in the
some of
world,
my
man.
favorites, man. They're incredible.
I've seen Silverstein a number of times, and every time they play "Giving Up" and "Smashed into Pieces," I'm like, wow, his voice sounds so much better now. You know,
Yep.
it's cool to hear. It's cool to hear them, the band and Shane himself, kind of breathe new life into songs that are very special to you because of how shitty they are. You know what I'm saying?
I saw them a few times, but I don't feel like it was ever really enough. They were always a solid performance though.
Yeah, they're really good, man. They're really good. I like this album. This was definitely going to be in my top 10. I'm pretty sure
I
it's in my
knew it
top
would
5.
be.
It's up there, man. It's I will forever stand Silverstein.
It's in this list for a reason. Next up, we have another one of my picks, which is Let It Enfold You by Census Fail.
God, this one was so
Uh,
hard to cut, bro.
I'm sure, dude. Much like I said about Panic, to make an album like this when you're a teenager is unthinkable to me. I said Panic was polarizing. This album is just perfect, though. You can hang Lady in a Blue Dress, Buried Alive, Bite to Break Skin, and Rum is for Drinking in the Louvre right now.
Yep. Yep.
The downside to this album and Census Fail in general is that this album is so great that they've never been able to escape its shadow. Everything that they release gets compared to it. The songs from this album are are the ones that everybody wants to hear when they see them play live, and like who can blame them, man? The breakdown to Bite to Break Skin live is always a good time. I should know I've seen Census Fail like 15 fucking times, and they were great literally every single time. What about you, though? What are your thoughts on this album and Census Fail in general?
I've only ever seen them once, but they were very good then. Let me instead of talking about Let It Unfold You for a second, I'm going to talk about Still Searching. I remember in 2000, it was 2006. I must have been 15 years old, 16 years old, no, 15 years old. And was I 16? It was something like that. It was 2006, and the album had just come out. It was a Friday, and I had just gotten home from hanging out with all of my friends, and man, I was really hoping to have had this album downloaded by the time I got home because I started it about 7 hours ago, but it wasn't quite there yet, so I had to stay up a little later to get it to be fully downloaded before I could transfer it onto my iPod so I could listen to it. Anyways, I say all of this to say that we're fucking spoiled in this world. I like Still Searching, but that's really only the only album of theirs that gets anywhere close to Let It Unfold You, man. This album is lyrically it's fucking heavy, thematically it's heavy. I mean, Rum is for Drinking, Lady, I mean, you said it, Lady in a Blue Dress, Buried Alive, You're Cute When You Scream,
Mm-hmm.
Tie Her Down, even the intro, man. I mean, it's all just as close to perfect as one can get. Even the album cover of this fucking tormented soul
Iconic.
looking at himself in the mirror, burning in hell. Just
The acoustic versions on the deluxe edition, like they're everything about this album is just purely iconic, man.
Yeah, and that would be the first when I was downloading Still Searching would be the first of a number of disappointments of albums that came out after this era in the early 2000s pre when did Let It Unfold You come out? 2004. So pre 2005 we had a lot of fucking amazing albums, and then 2006 hit and it almost felt like bands were trying to do something that they really couldn't quite do. A Death Grip on Yesterday by Atreyu comes to mind, and it's one of
The
those
second
things, man.
Matchbook Romance
The
album.
second Matchbook Romance album. I mean, there's a number that's like never could come close to the album before it, to the album that preceded it, and look, man, if you create an art that's good enough to have all of your other art compared to it in the future, as if it were, like you said, hanging in the Louvre,
Mhm.
like, I mean, you got to be proud of that, bro. I will say, Census Fail did a like a concert, like a live stream right after the pandemic had started, in Joshua Tree, kind of like Rufus Du Sol did, which I thought was pretty interesting. But I've watched it; it's pretty good. They rip live, dude. That'll give them. They have a fucking crazy show.
Oh, I don't doubt it at all, man. I haven't seen them in years, but man, just staying up to download music. What a time.
We're spoiled. Thursday, 9 p.m. rolls around. We got new music just
We
right at
do.
the tap of our fingers. I had to like jump on SoulSeek, make sure that somebody had the album that I could download in a folder in like the right file format for my computer. Like there was a lot that went into it. And if you were on
Tons.
LimeWire, good luck you didn't get no Bill Clinton.
Oh God, not again. Not Pam and Tommy again.
Right?
Um, I think to be clear though, Census Fail is still a good are still a good band putting out good albums. They
Yeah.
just ain't putting out Let It Enfold You again.
Yes, I totally agree to that.
All right, man. We'll do another one of your picks. This one shocked me when I saw your list. You heard me when I saw your
I
list.
know.
It's Count Your Blessings by Bring Me the Horizon, which is a band I was expecting, but not the album I was expecting. I figured you would pick Suicide Season, if anything. So tell me why you picked this album.
Sentimentality is the short version. The long version is I was living with a friend when I was 16, and we would wake up every morning and just fucking
Pray for Plagues.
blast this album. We would click on Pray for Plagues. By the time we were ready to hit school, the album was ending. It's just 36 minutes of fuck you, I'm going to do what I want, which is one of the reasons why I'm pretty mad that Bring Me the Horizon changed. I mean, you've got a lot like Vegas on here. You've got Tell Slater not to wash his dick, Pray for Plagues, for Stevie Wonder's Eyes Only. God, can you almost cut yourself on this edge? Just. It is to me iconic, and yes, Suicide Season is most definitely an album of all time. But I and even the Suicide Season, what is it called, the Reconstructed or something like that, where they've got all the remixes from
Hmm.
a bunch of artists that don't really make music anymore, except for Skrillex, which is an interesting little remix
Imagine
they've got
that.
there. Yeah, man. I don't know how much time you've spent with this album, but I not only did I go through like the end of my high school years with this album and Suicide Season, but I went on to after high school party to all of this music with all of my friends. And to me, those two albums from Bring Me the Horizon are just extremely special to me, and I couldn't let us go and do this episode without talking about the clear influence they had on the scene as a whole, because they
Yeah,
really did influence a ton of
of
bands
course.
to become deathcore bands, and they knew how to throw some bravado into what could have been and eventually turned into kind of a dead genre. And we're seeing a little renaissance right now, but deathcore was not a genre that anybody really talked about for the last five or the last between 2010 and 2020. Not a lot of
Hmm.
there wasn't a lot of movement there, and there's been a ton of good albums that were released in that period, but that time period was kind of dead for the genre. And this album really, I think, shaped a lot of. I mean, it stood the test of time for me. Every once in a while, I'll get nostalgic and be like, you know what? It's a Pray for Plagues kind of morning.
Yeah, man, I have no objections to this pick. Like I said earlier, I tend to gravitate towards earlier albums of bands like this, so I get where you're coming from. I like their earlier deathcore stuff, but it's not my favorite Bring Me the Horizon albums. I think my favorites are probably There Is Hell and Sempiternal. That's like my sweet spot for their discography, but I do miss this era of them quite a bit as well.
It was just no holds barred. Like let's go. It was just a party. Every time you throw on Pray for Plagues, I'm like, I need a beer. You know, like
Yeah. Oh, I get it, man. I get it. I needed a few this week every time I threw this playlist on. All right, man. Next up, we have Riot by Paramore. This was one of my picks, but where do you rank it?
honestly, man, I never really got so into Paramore. I actually didn't even really listen to Riot until like 2009, 2010, when somebody told me you never listened to that. Um,
Jonathan
uh,
has left the chat.
yeah, honestly, I had listened to Misery Business, obviously, but revisiting this album this week has put a little bit more life into it for me. And I remember back, 13 years ago. Jesus Christ, I'm old. Listening to it for the first time and being like, yeah, this is really good. But it is impossible to ignore the amount of influence that this album brought to pop punk as a whole at the
Mhm.
time. She had the hair, she had the voice, they had the music. It was the band themselves had the fucking stage presence. I mean, they played Warp Tour, I'm sure, like 3 or 4 years in a row or something like that, from my understanding. And good for them, man. And then you, of course, have talked and hung out with this band. So tell me about this album, John.
Okay, so yes, I picked this one because of a few reasons. One, it is my favorite album of theirs. It's iconic, like you said, Misery Business, Crush Crush Crush, etc. But this is a bit of a sentimentality pick for me as well. As I've told you before, I spent a couple of years doing live videos for bands that would tour through Northern California. And by like do videos, I mean we would show up to a show of theirs with a camera and ask if we could film them. I don't think we were ever told no. Most bands were pretty happy to have somebody making extra content for them and just getting live footage. One of the bands we ended up filming during that time ended up being Paramore. They were on tour. The first time we saw them with Amber Pacific and the Lashes, their first album had just been released, as well as the music video for Pressure. They did not even headline that show, although it felt like most people were there to see them. There was only about 100 people at that show tops. We got to that show, asked if we could record their set. They said yes. I remember the guitarist and the bassist at the time telling us to try and get like a certain shot of a move that they would do live during Pressure. It was a lot of fun. The footage is decent for a mini DV camera, but the audio is terrible. You can find it on YouTube. We'll throw it in the show notes below. Anyways, after that set, we ended up hanging out with them for like the next 3 to 4 hours and ended up filming most of that shit too. It was just a lot of us being dumb. We uploaded that live footage to YouTube that night after editing it, and we just decided to upload the random extra footage too, and titled it Paramore Being Crazy. A few months after that, Emergency came out and they blew up. People had caught on. They came back to the same venue we had just seen them at about 6 months later, and instead of a bus or instead of a van, they had a bus. And
Oh
instead of
yeah,
about 100 people there, the line was down the block,
that's
hours
amazing.
before the door opened. The capacity for the boardwalk online is listed at 200 people. So either that's not right or they were breaking the law every single show. Either way, we showed up to that one, sent a message to one of them saying we were just waiting in line and saw if they wanted to say hi or if they even remembered us. Sure enough, they texted us back, invited us over, and we ended up doing the exact same thing, filming their set, hanging out with them over the course of that night. And it didn't matter that there was literally a giant crowd of people to see them. They were still just as excited to say hi and hang out like they were 6 months earlier. It
That
was it
is
was really
amazing.
cool.
That is
And
amazing.
I guess to finish it up, man, like we ended up, I think, meeting them one more time in Warp Tour in San Fran for a brief interview. And I think that's the first time I ever got to see them, or the last time I ever saw them live. But this story makes it all sound like my pick is all you know is falling. But this whole timeline concluded with them releasing Riot and becoming one of the biggest and most influential groups of their era, like you were saying.
I mean, everybody knows who Paramore is. Their influence is is not to be fucked with. Like, there's no way to do that really because, yeah, man, it's Paramore. Everybody knows, and people might complain about their new music, or people might really like their new music, etc., etc. But my God, man, you had to have made an impact for people to even be doing that. You know,
Yep. Yep. Speaking of, I guess we should plug next week's episode of Brandon's Face, where we will be reviewing their new album.
we will be. We absolutely will be.
Check that out. All right, man, let's move on. We wasted a lot of time on Paramore. Next up, we have one of your picks, which is Shadows Are Security by As I Lay Dying, which thank you for throwing this on this week, man, because I've had so much fun revisiting this. But tell me why it made your list and if any of their other releases were in contention for you.
The breakdown on Reflections. That's why it made my list. No, I kid. I kid. This was released in 2005, which was, God, it was such a fucking great year. And they had released prior, I think it was 2003 or something like that. I got to double check now. Frail Words Collapse was 2003. And I had a friend who was, you know, went to school with me, and he was wearing this As I Lay Dying shirt, and it had a skull on it, and I was like, "Who is that?" And his response was, "Only the band with the best breakdowns ever, bro." And I was like, "Okay, fucking awesome. Let's talk about it." And he was like, "Well, they're going to be releasing an album soon." And I was like, "All right, fucking great." And I remember buying this album on release day and putting it in my 6-disc changer stereo system in my room, fucking cranking it and just being blown the fuck away. I didn't find out until months later that they were a Christian band, but none of that mattered to me because, by God, this album is incredible. Just from the opening riff and Meeting Is Tragedy all the way through the the breakdown in Reflection, the dueling guitars and Morning Waits, like the Haste the Day vocalist feature in Control Is Dead. All of this to say that this album is incredibly special to me. This album is the album that opened me up. I talk a lot about how I got into heavy music and the scene itself. And in 2000, and I think it was 4, I was gifted a CD of The Used and Slipknot, and that was kind of the dichotomy. This album, though, this album was the one that got me into, oh, well, what record label is this? Oh, this is Metal Blade Is this metal? And so I just dived head first into the heavy. This album is it. This is the reason why I like Cannibal Corpse. This album is the reason why I like Archspire today. You know, like, this is the reason why I just reviewed Ashen's new album on our website. This album is the reason for me liking heavy music, and I cannot ever thank the members of As I Lay Dying enough. As much of a douchebag as Tim Lambesis is, this album will forever hold a very special place in my heart. And I heard this one before I heard Frail Words Collapse, which is a very good album, don't get me wrong. It is a very, 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 very close runner-up to Shadows of Security. But by God, this album is close to perfect, man. In fact, fuck it. It's a perfect album. I love this fucking album, man. It is.
It's been long enough. We can say it's perfect.
It's a perfect album, man. It's fucking great. Everything about it is fucking awesome. So I've talked a lot. What do you think about Shadows of Security, man?
I think to what you were saying earlier, you're going to like the album you discovered the band during the most. So I was always more partial to Frail Worlds Collapse. 94 Hours and Forever are the songs of theirs that made me a fan to begin with. But after revisiting Shadows or Security for this podcast, I can see why you picked it, and I admit that it is the superior album.
It's a better album.
In short, man, it just fucking rips. Like, there's really nothing more to say. You can put it on, and it just goes. Like, I don't know, man. There's just something about this, and we'll talk about the Haste the Day album here in a minute, but, like, something about this era in metal that was just fucking incredible, man. These albums that are somehow, like, dense but palatable. Like, It was just magic. It was magic.
If you were to print out the lyrics to fucking throw a dart at this album, right? If you were to pick
Hmm.
out the lyrics to any one of these songs and put them in front of somebody, that somebody would say, "Is this a poem?"
Now I'm just thinking of the damn anime meme. Is this it's
I'm
just with the
I'm
shadows of security lyrics.
I'm for real though. This album is poetry in a heavy form, and you're right. It's palatable, man. I mean, it's palatable yet super fucking heavy.
Hmm.
Um, I. I'm a fidgeter. I fidget constantly. I'm constantly tapping my fingers, moving my legs a little bit. My wife hates me for it, but the majority of the time when I've been doing this, and this has been for fucking 10, 20 years at this point, right? Almost.
Hmm.
What was it? This album is 18 years old. Fuck. Almost every time I do anything like that, it's to the rhythm of the Reflection breakdown.
That's incredible. It's just like embedded in
It
your
is
nervous
embedded
system.
into my fucking head, man. My nerves don't know anything except for fine dining, breathing, and the Reflection breakdown.
I didn't really think about it, but when I was on the road listening to this song today, I would occasionally like drum on my knees, and I would always be doing the bass to one of the songs on this album.
It's just
Yeah, they're just such fun grooves, man. They're so catchy.
it's so, and like they're all simple, right? You can I even when I played guitar, I learned a little bit of confined. Like it's all pretty simple. It's just done in such a way that
Incredibly well
is
done.
just so well done, man. God, I love this album. I'm gonna listen to it
It's
right after we're done
fantastic.
recording.
You should. You
I'm gonna,
should.
I'm, I'm gonna throw the record on.
All right, man. Next up, we have another one of my picks, which is Chiodos's debut album, All's Well That Ends Well. If I could pick one album to hear for the first time again, it would be this album. Specifically, the feeling I got the first time I heard Craig Owens sing the words, "If your stomach feels weak, then my work here is done." Man, this album
God.
came out of fucking nowhere, right as the scene was peaking, and their ascension was accelerated as a result. I remember hearing this album for the first time one day and being told I pretty much had to buy tickets the next day if I wanted a chance to see them live because it was going to sell out.
Oh, most
And
definitely.
I don't remember much about that show other than Yesterday's Rising was one of the openers. My buddy Kevin running around the stage being chased by security during the breakdown to There's No Penguins in Alaska, and going to a party at one of my friends' houses afterwards, and all of the members of Chiodos being there because they were broke ass kids with no place to stay that needed somewhere to sleep for the night. And I went from not knowing who they were to them being one of my favorite bands, and this is being one of my favorite albums of all time. And that's just never really changed since, man. What about you? Where are you at with this album?
I have a thing. It is expired in Goreville, and if you time it just right, the next time you get on a plane, John, go ahead and throw on expired in Goreville as you are like leaving, like stopping to taxi and like starting to hit that airstrip, and as you ascend when the guitars come in, if you time it just right, it is fucking bliss. It is just amazing.
This is like the Brandon's version of if you start this song at 11:59 on
Yeah.
New Year's Eve,
Oh
then this
yeah.
part will hit as midnight happens. You
Oh
do
yeah.
this on your flights.
I do this on every flight I've taken since I've discovered that it worked. It just happened one day, and I was like, "Oh, really? This is fucking cool." Yeah, man. This album is a masterpiece, man. No hardcore dancing in the living room has got to be one of the most iconic. It's got to be one of the most iconic song names
Hmm.
of the genre, man. Baby, you wouldn't last a minute on the creek.
Phenomenal
Fuck,
song,
man.
by the way.
Fuck. I'll stop stabbing when you start, or I'll stop stabbing when you stop screaming. There's some lyrics I read on this album. I think it's on.
Poetry.
Yeah.
Poetry.
Yeah. Just poetry, man. Just poetry. This podcast may be the best idea that we've ever had.
It might be, man.
All Nereids beware. I mean, fuck, man. There's no penguins in Alaska. Just so many
The
Bangers.
lyrics to this album, so many iconic lines, man. The
Uh,
finest treasures are buried under waves. Like they just were instantly memorable, like right off the bat.
yeah, man, they did this thing where you, you, they do this thing where you're able to like it's I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to explain it, man. The lyrics are they don't write lyrics like this, man. And by they, I also mean Craig Owens. We just reviewed an album of his, which is great. Don't get me wrong, but by
Mhm.
God, this album has it. You know the the
It's
fuck.
the let it unfold you effect almost. Like everything he does is compared to this. Although Bone Palace Ballet was a phenomenal
Oh
second
yeah,
album
oh
by
yeah.
Chiodos. Just as good, way different though. Much
God.
more high budget and high thematics. This is there was something about the raw overall sound of this album. I'm not like a music person, so I don't know specifically what people were talking about, but I remember a lot of guys and bands that I was hanging out with at the time talking about like the way the guitars on this album sound is unlike anything ever. And people would chase this sound. Like,
It's
how do you
impossible.
make your stuff sound the way Chiodo sounds on this album? Is you don't.
You don't. You don't. And I totally
It was
understand what
probably
they're
done
saying.
improperly. It's
Right.
honest.
That's kind of what I'm thinking too. It's got to be like a studio mix up, and somebody was like, "Wait, play that again."
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Oh man, what are the lyrics, man? The lyrics to "Expired in Goreville," I think it's "alluring dreams of touching starry skies."
Hmm.
Fuck, man.
Very vivid, dude. Very vivid. There's like spoken word interludes on this album too.
It's incredible. There's like a circus interlude. I think it's interlude part 2 or something like that. Yeah, man. We were spoiled in 2005 because both the last album that we talked about, Shadows of Security, and this one came out in the same year. And
Hmm.
by God, man,
Excellent. Excellent albums.
yes.
All right, man. Next up, we can talk about Suicide Silence's debut album, The Cleansing. I forgot how much heavier your taste in music was than mine until I saw you pick this. I'm a pretty casual Suicide Silence fan at best. My favorite of theirs is probably The Black Crown, but I had a
Okay.
lot of fun revisiting this album for this week's podcast, man. It's just a great deathcore album. Mitch Lucker was a phenomenal talent, but what is it that made you love this album so much and pick it?
Well, I actually put this on in lieu of their first self-titled EP that was released in 2005, not being on streaming, which is a fucking just so rude. And it's the first time I ever heard the song, both songs, "Bludgeon to Death" and "No Pity for a Coward." But this album, when it came out, and it was a little late to the scene, 2008. But yeah, man, you listened to it this week. Can you tell me that if there's any song on this that isn't a banger?
No, God no.
It's
God no.
just the entirety of this album is just a banger, man. "Destruction of a Statue" being the last song, which was, I believe, the first song on their EP, which I still have in my CD case. Fuck, man. "Unanswered." It's "Why All Your Prayers Go Unanswered." "The Price of Beauty." Just I remember it was a big thing in 2008 when Headbangers Ball was still a thing. Headbangers Ball, for the people that don't know, was a late night MTV show that they were able to finally play music videos for metal bands that weren't quite palatable for the I guess when the sun was out crowd. I don't know. They should
Should
have
we tell
played
people what MTV is or what music videos are as well?
on Headbangers Ball. They would play a bunch of 6 Feet Under and a bunch of Cannibal Corpse and a bunch of heavy music. "The Price of Beauty" music video got removed, was banned from MTV, couldn't play it. I'm gonna throw the link into the show notes because it's a pretty gnarly video, and the lyrics themselves are pretty gnarly too about the price of beauty. Go listen to it. This album is extremely important to me. I listen to it on the regular. It's a number of times a year listen for me. Similar to a lot of the albums on this playlist, but I every time, it's almost like every deathcore album I ever listened to is always held up to, well, it wasn't quite as heavy as "Unanswered." You know?
Yeah, I added Unanswered to like my classic scene playlist instantly upon hearing it. So I think I'll be adding this into my yearly rotation as well.
It's a good one, man. It's a really good
It's
one.
very good. It's very good. And I
R.I.P.
thank
Mitch
you for
Lucker.
forcing me to listen to it again whenever because I slept on it. I slept on their first two albums, I think.
Yeah, the what is it? No Time to Bleed.
I think so.
Yeah,
The
No Time
second
to
one.
Bleed. That's a good one too, man. Mitch Lucker had a voice, man. God.
Dude had some pipes. R.I.P.
Yeah.
All right, man. Okay, we each have one pick left. We will do mine first, which is Dear Diary, My Teen Angst Has a Body Count by From First to Last. Before I talk about this album, it's crazy that in 2023, Sonny Moore is the most famous that he's ever been, and a majority of people probably don't even know that he used to be the singer of a prominent emo band.
It's wild to me that Sonny Moore Skrillex is this fucking kid from this and heroin. Like,
Yep.
holy shit, man.
From jumping off the scaffolding of the smart punk stage to the Grammys.
My God.
Yeah, man. This version of From First to Last with Sonny Moore was a flash in the pan in retrospect. He was only in the
Yep.
band from 2004 until early 2007. I was lucky enough to see them three times in that span, and every single time was memorable. The first two times I saw them, Dear Diary was the only album that they had out, and they played every song off of it, including the hidden track, which, if I remember correctly, used to be called Dead Baby Kickball.
I do
That
remember
sounds
that.
right.
I do
Yeah,
remember that.
I
Oh
think
my
it used to be
God.
referred to as that, which probably got changed for a few reasons.
I wonder
Um,
why.
there's few things in life better than seeing them perform Emily in a tiny club with every person in the crowd screaming every word back at them.
Yep.
Of all the bands that have disappeared from this era, they are the one that I wish would reunite the most. We were gifted two random singles in the late 2010s and a surprise emo night performance or two, but for the most part, they remain inactive, sadly. At what point in your life did you discover this album, and how high up are they on your list of bands that you hope reunite?
I actually didn't hear this album until Heroin came out, and I had seen the music video for what's the song on that one? The
Shame,
Latest
shame,
Plague.
or World War Me.
I think it was The
Or
Latest
no.
Plague.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It is the latest
Um,
plague.
so I remember seeing the music video for that song and being like, "Who the fuck is this band?" And I think it was
Hmm.
2006, and looking at it, looking at the band, and listening to reading the title for this album, Dear Diary, comma, My Teen Angst Has a Body Count. I was like, oh my God, The Edge, man. They've got to be good, right? And then you throw on Note to Self, and it's like, holy fuck. It's great, though. This song does have, Emily has 20 million, but Note to Self has 14,997,000 plays on Spotify. And
Hmm.
I'm sure the music video has some crazy on YouTube also. I love this band. I love this album. I kind of I don't even really care if they reunite. To be completely honest with you, man, I don't think they need to. They gave us this and Heroin, which are both fucking fantastic albums. And how do you beat that? How do you top that? It would just be a Let It Enfold You situation all over again, just for from first to
Okay,
last.
let me ask you a more hypothetical question then. You can go back in time and see the Sonny Moore fronted From First to Last, or you can see one of the original A Fever You Can't Sweat Out shows.
Sonny Moore fronted from first to last.
I love that. That's why we're friends. That's why.
Most definitely, man. Just and I'm a big fan of organized chaos in both like music and at shows. None of their shows from all of the footage I've seen was organized at all.
No,
Like
no.
you watch
Like
footage of their old shows and even like the security guards are like, how the fuck do we control this crowd? Like
you don't.
that's the
It was
neat part.
great.
You don't.
Yeah. It was great. All right, man. We can finish out our list with your last pick. Tell me what it was that made When Everything Falls from Haste the Day your favorite album of theirs.
Just the amount of times that again, this is another album from 2005. This is just the golden year. Yeah, man, I remember getting into As I Lay Dying, and just consuming as much of this as I possibly could, and figuring out who they were touring with. Turns out they were touring with Haste the Day, and I was like, all right, who's this band? And finding, I actually think it was Walk On that I heard first, and I remember being like, holy fuck, this guy's the vocals on this are so unique, man. And just falling in love with the way Jimmy fucking screamed with his whole body.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, man, this album is, again, it's a 3 times a year listen for me at the very least. Like every once in a while I'll get a hair and I'll just be like, you know what, fuck it, it's time. I have an alarm set for every June 28th. On its anniversary, I listen to it every year. Like it's
I love that.
it's a thing, man. This is easy a top 10 scene album for me, and yeah, I'll never forget the first time I heard this in its entirety, because I remember listening to Walk On, being like, whoa, this guy's vocals are fucking crazy, and then like hitting Soul Seeker and downloading his this album. And I remember it actually going pretty fast because this guy had like some crazy upload speed or something like that, and I got this and I burned it onto a CD and threw it in my Discman, and I was taking the bus to the mall or something that day, and my God, man, this album is,
So many words in that sentence that don't make sense anymore, right?
yeah, I know that there's so much to this era that is just so epic. But I'm glad we ended on this album. What did you think about When Everything Falls?
Oh man, I love this album. One of the 3 times that I saw from first to last, Haste the Day was the opener. Rainy
Hell
Night in
yeah.
Sacramento. He is Legend was supposed to open, got in an accident on the way. Haste the Day came on stage, Jimmy on vocals. All I remember was looking back during the Bridge of American Love and seeing a World War Z like wall of people building. It was as beautiful as it was scary, because as soon as the breakdown came, I remember Jimmy doing a motion like jamming a sword into a stone type of thing. So because of that memory, I've always been a little more partial to Burning Bridges, but upon revisiting both of them, When Everything Falls is the better album. Although that opinion is subject to change every time I hear Burning Bridges again.
Fair, super fair,
Thank you. Thank
super
you.
fair. It was just announced that Haste the Day has announced a festival date. The last album they put out was the last original album they put out was 8 years ago. So
Huh. We'll have to keep an eye on that. This would be the year, honestly.
again, man, we're in a renaissance, and I think a lot of bands are finally catching on to it. Like, oh shit, people like guitars again, and it's happening. It is real life happening. So I
It
doubt we'll
is,
get
and we
Jimmy on
get to
vocals,
enjoy it.
but
That does it for our list. Did you want to run through any honorable mentions really quick, or do you want to save them for
sure,
another day?
man. I mean, we can
All right,
run.
get. No,
I
no, you said you had two. Give me them. I'm curious.
I have, in fact, I actually have 3.
Hit me.
Seosin's translating the name. It's an EP. Didn't
Okay,
quite make the
so
list, but
that one was one of mine too, and we'll just talk about this one now because I have Seosin's translating the name slash their self-titled debut album with Cove. Like, I feel like translating the name is maybe the most iconic EP in all of the scene,
yes,
correct?
absolutely. No doubt about it.
It only doesn't make the top 10 because it's an EP.
Yep.
But I think that their self-titled deserves almost just as much love.
I think it was 2016 when I saw Seosin with Anthony Green, and it was great because they played the whole EP front to back, and everybody was like encore, and they came out and they were like, we don't have any more songs, so here's 7 years again. And it was fucking beautiful. My
They could
second,
only play 7 years 10 times, and I'd be happy.
I'd be good with it. My second, the one that was hardest for me to cut from this list was AFI's Sing the Sorrow.
Oh, see, I don't have that one in my honorable mentions. I'm glad you have it. That's a beautiful album. Love it. I think that most people from maybe slightly after that era would think December Underground was their bigger one, but I'm with you. Sing the Sorrow is their best album.
Everybody go watch the video to the Leaving Song Part 2, and you'll realize why the scene died is because we all danced like that.
Yeah. Is that your favorite song on the album too? That's mine.
I don't know, man. I think Through Sunday is my favorite song on that album.
I think it's because the first time I saw them, that was the song that they opened with. And it's just like one of those moments, you know? I'll run through a few of mine. We'll just do some quick word association. The Academy is almost here.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a tough cut. I love that one, but I feel that one's much more in the 10 to 20 range
It's
than the
funny,
1 to
man.
10.
My wife and I, we were doing a puzzle this weekend, and I threw this vinyl on, and every single song we know every single fucking word to.
Of course, of
Every
course.
single song.
Were you wearing sunglasses?
No.
The sun went down about an hour ago.
Look, man, slow down, okay?
Armor for Sleep, What to Do When You're Dead.
Same with this one. We just did the same thing.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you were revisiting a lot of the albums I were.
Yeah.
Again, this one's probably in the 10 to 15 range somewhere, but definitely in the conversation. Cartel Chroma.
It's in there. It's up there, man. This was
I feel
way
like
more
this
on the
one,
pop side of things for me, but
yes.
it was at the time a very guilty pleasure of mine. I'm
When
not guilty
you do
about it anymore.
honestly into Say Anything or whatever order those are, that is maybe the best 2 song run on any pop rock album of all time. It's
Fair.
incredible.
Fair.
All right, here's my hardest cut. This is my easy number 11. A Day to Remember, Homesick.
Oof.
Every song is perfect on this album. It just came a
a great
post
album.
peak, you know,
Yeah.
the scene was dying at this point, but this might have been the last seminal album before things kind of shifted into the next phase.
I'm sorry, did you just accuse A Day to Remember of killing the scene?
Yes, I did.
I actually just saw them in 2019. They were very good. They were very good.
I think they're good for what they are. They're a slightly different band now, though.
They played a lot of old stuff, and they were really cheeky about it. They're very self-aware about what they were and what they are and what what it is. Tool was playing that night, and he was like, "Hey, you guys want to hear some? You guys want to hear a Tool cover?" And everybody was like, "I don't think we want you to cover Tool." Yeah. And he pulls out an acoustic guitar and starts doing the initial riff to Schism. And I was like, "Is he really gonna do this?" And he was like, "I'm just fucking with you guys. I'm not gonna play Tool."
That's awesome.
I was like, "Hey, at least he gets it, you know."
Oh man, I love that. Emery, The Question. Another phenomenal one. Hawthorne Heights, The Silence in Black and White, maybe one of the most iconic that didn't make our list.
Nikki FM, man. I think
Ohio is for Lovers t-shirts across the U.S.
I think at least once or twice a year I tell my wife I'm outside of her window with my radio, and she
rolls her eyes.
She loves it every time I say it.
Everybody loves that. You always have the sickest references, Brandon.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
Hello Goodbye. You could either go their EP with Shimmy Shimmy Quarter Turn, Call and Return, all of that, or Zombies, Aliens, Vampires, Dinosaurs, which of course had Here in Your Arms on it, which I think is inarguably one of the bigger scene songs, as poppy as it is.
I was more of a Forever the Sickest Kids kind of guy.
Forever the Sickest Kids are good too. I would say that I wouldn't say that their albums were as iconic as Hello Goodbyes became. Hello Goodbye hit that MTV threshold with Here in Your Arms, which doesn't necessarily qualify you automatically for this list, but I do think that album was really good start to finish.
Yeah, no, I'll give you that. There are two things that I do want to mention before the end of this, and maybe they're for another podcast or whatever. But the Medic Droid, and Hollywood Undead. Both. Those
are two bands.
Those are two bands that killed the scene. That and then Crunk Core started it, and that's it.
Wait, you're not starting this conversation an hour into this. Medic Droid did not kill the scene. Their album is fucking great, by the way. We're gonna have that conversation another day. Breathe Carolina, I'll hear that. Medic Droid, you do not say a goddamn bad word about the Medic Droid. You didn't say 303, but you said the Medic Droid. Come on, Brandon.
I did.
303, if anybody. If anybody.
That was more of a teaser for what will eventually be a new episode of this installment. But this was fun, man.
And that was a teaser for the fight we will be having on set.
We're gonna fight. We're gonna fight for sure.
All right. I think that does it for us this week. We hope you all enjoyed this special episode. Let us know your favorite scene albums of all time in the comments. We will be back to our regularly scheduled programming next week when we will be breaking down new albums from Paramore, Pierce the Veil, Kalela, Tennis, and In Flames. You do not want to miss that one. Anything you want to talk about before we get out of here? You
That's
good?
it. That's
All
it.
right. We'll see you all next week.
Peace.
Peace.